Hey everybody, it is Nick here again for Grayscale Gorilla. I am the Gorilla, and today we're going to do another Cinema 4D tutorial based on a piece by Korb. I forget how I found this, maybe through Motionographer or something, or maybe somebody emailed me and asked me how the heck to do it. But I got really excited when I saw it. I said, hey, I think we could figure this one out. I started digging around in Cinema, trying to figure out exactly how we could get this together, and I think we figured it out. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how the heck I did it. So let's go in and see the original piece first of all, because it's so awesome. First of all, so let's head on in and check it out. Here's their website, korb.it. And this spot here, it looks like one of their more recent spots. Let's play it. Now, this video has 3 parts in it. We're only concerned with the first one, so let's go ahead and play this. So that's it. Real short, but it's a little stinger for MTV. Looks like biggest tracks right now, you know. And, of course, what's really cool about all these MTV gigs is you get to do these really fun, abstract kind of 3D things, and they just look so cool. And I got excited when I saw this because I'm like, man, that would be really fun to figure out how they did that. And it's simple enough on the surface to figure it out without worrying about all the lighting at first. And that's what I like kind of trying out. So let's take a look at what happened. So I replayed this a bunch of times and kind of looked at what's going on. The first thing is obviously all these lights are kind of lighting up as they spring toward, kind of pointing up toward the sky there, right? And then they kind of fall down when they turn off. And it's also in time with the music, which is really cool. They kind of flicker on and off. And the last thing I noticed is they alternate. So you can see some bulbs are coming off the ground here, and some are staying kind of dead for the moment. And then the ones that were dead then light up, right? And then spring up high. And then here toward the end, they all kind of start to activate. And, there's even some pink ones. I didn't add those in mine, but I dig that. Anyway, that's the basics of it. And so we're going to go ahead into Cinema, build the model, get the dynamics working, and show you how to animate all this stuff. We're also going to play a little bit with Xpresso to try to link the attraction to these clones, to these particles, and attach the lighting up of the lights to the attractiveness. So we don't have to do a ton of different animating. We just animate one parameter, and it all goes through. Am I making sense yet? I don't know, but let's go ahead into Cinema and start building this thing and see where we end up. Of course, the first thing you need is a big old cylinder, right? We got to build these bulbs first and start to spread them around. So we're going to start with the cylinder, and we're going to have it on its Z-axis instead of, or the X, I guess, either is fine. But we're going to start to build the bulb, so we could start to shrink it down. And now we can go get real measurements of bulbs and try to make this more accurate, but I'm going to kind of rough it here. So we have this kind of bulb shape, and that's the main bulb for the center. Now let's build the ends. I'm going to start with the same cylinder. I'm just going to duplicate that cylinder by copying and pasting, and then I'm going to make it slightly larger, maybe 5 radius. That may be too big, but then I'm going to shrink down and make a cap. So I shrink down the height, and I'm going to move it over to kind of make a cap out of it. And that looks a little bit too large. You can see it's a little too big there, maybe 4.5 or just a little bit larger than your bulb, whatever you make it. Now, the other thing about a cap is, I think it needs to be a little shorter. The other thing about a cap is it actually has a fillet on the edges, these little round things. And of course, by default, it's cranked up way too high, but we just need maybe 1 or, even maybe less than 1. You know, you just want this little round fillet, not only for the end, but also for the bulb side of things. And this will just give it a little bit of detail. And this is the chrome end cap. We'll be flicking back and forth between the original and here, just so we have a point of reference on how to start to texture and play with the gradients and all this stuff. But you can see each one of these bulbs has these little caps on it, and they're just a little bit larger, so they have a little bit of detail here. And the last thing while we're here is they have these 2 little prongs on the end to kind of plug into the socket. So let's go ahead and shrink that radius down a little bit more for the fillets. and maybe even shrink down the whole cylinder size. This is a real subtle thing, 4.3 or something like that. That seems like it's better. The next thing we need are what I used are capsules for the ends. And they're just little plugs, little kind of pill-shaped things that I thought would work well for the ends. Of course, these are way too big, so the radius, we're going to knock it down to like 1. We're also going to set the orientation to Z as well to be in line with our bulb. I'm going to move it out and kind of zoom in and start to play with the, first of all, the height needs to be way, way down. And the radius is probably less than 1, so let's go to like 0.2, 0.3 maybe. And, you know, again, the goal isn't to type in 0.2 or 0.3. It's to, you know, really just play around until it looks like the original, or it looks like the way that you want, right? So I'm going to shrink these down to more like 10 maybe. I could really go low with these because these are just little prongs that stick out. And then there's 2 of them. So there's one on this edge, and then I'm going to duplicate and make one on this edge. And that's it. That's our end. That's our simplified cap. And I think actually that the only thing is our cylinder is still a little bit too long. So I'm going to play around with that. And let's call that good. That looks pretty good to me. So from here, what we do is we can start to name things like bulb and then cap, like this is one cap. But let's do that as we duplicate all 3 of these and make the other cap really quickly. So let's zoom out, and I'm going to just, you know, copy, paste, and it's going to duplicate those 3 pieces of the cap again. And then I can move it all over, kind of rotate around here. And then you can see it's reversed, so we just got to grab our rotate tool, and then I'm gonna hold Shift to constrain it to 5-degree increments and go directly to 180 degrees. Grab my move tool, move it out there, and I think we have a bulb. Holy crap, that looks great. Maybe a little long. I don't know. We'll see. So that's our bulb. What we could do now is we could grab up all the caps, and we could group them. I'm going to hit Option G to group them into a null and just call this caps, right? And then we're going to wrap this whole thing up into a group, and we're going to call this full bulb or something, just so we can keep track of it. So now that's just one little object that inside we have all this other stuff. And this will be the bulb that's going to be replicated, duplicated all the way around. So there's our bulb. So let's go ahead and make our floor and our wall and get our bulbs kind of situated and set up. Let's grab a plane, and there's a plane there. Let's go ahead and just scale it up. We need a lot of room here for these bulbs to kind of clone around the floor and kind of move around. I'm also going to duplicate the plane, really zoom out here, and grab our move tool, move it back, and flip it up and make our wall. Again, I'm holding Shift to constrain to 5 degrees, and I'm gonna move it till it says 90 degrees, so I know it's flat. And now we have almost flat. We got one more 5. Yeah, that's a little off. Yeah, that seems more like it. All right, there's our wall, and there's our bulb, and we're on our way, folks. So let's go ahead and take the bulb and put it into a cloner. So in your MoGraph tab, you're going to have a cloner object. You could add that cloner object and drag the full bulb into it. And what I decided with, and here's where there's a difference between what I started with and where I ended up. And let me show you my thought process, because again, I could show you just exactly what buttons I pressed to get to my solution. But I think going through the steps a little bit is helpful. So what I originally started with was a grid array, and I set this to 1 and set the Y to 1, and then I made a couple clones, maybe 6 clones this way, 6 clones this way, kind of stretched it out and started to get these things kind of moving. And then I used a random effector to start to randomize these. I went into parameter and shut off the Y random turn it to 0, and then move these, and then rotated. Use the rotate random to kind of make a pile. See what's going on here? It's kind of making a pile. And this worked okay for a long time. And the reason this didn't end up working very well is because of the nature of the way that these bulbs move. And you can see each of these bulbs kind of are like kind of heavy on one side, right? And it's kind of heavy on this side and light on this side, which means that they're all kind of pointing this way. And that's how I read it anyway, is there's and I think bulbs are actually made this way, where there's maybe even a ballast or some sort of contraption in one side of these bulbs that make them heavy. I don't know. I haven't picked one up, but that was my thinking going into this, is that these things are trying to escape to the sky, but one side of these bulbs are kind of grounding it back to the earth. And so, to make a long story short, hopefully this pattern wasn't working because each of their, let's say, heads and tails, if the tail is heavy and the head is light, were pointing in different directions, which meant that when we ended up doing all this crazy animation, they didn't all raise up toward the sky like this. See how they all almost just all point. Instead, what happens was they were aiming in different directions. Anyway, this is a small point. I shouldn't make this big a deal about it. But what I did want to say was I tried the grid array, and what I ended up with was using the radial array. So let me shut off the random effector, and we'll turn on radial array, and we'll turn it up, and we'll make the radius a little bit bigger, and let's move the plane of the radius to, I think, ZY. No. There we go. XZ is the place to be. So you can see now we have a circle of bulbs that are all pointing toward the center. Now we have to do some randomness to make it look random, right? See how random these are. But we're starting with the basic idea that these tips are going to point toward the sky, and these butts are going to stay on the ground, right? So let's go with that. So I'm going to turn up the count. I'm going to open up the radius a little bit, start to build our bulb thing. Now, one thing, we're going to jump around a little bit, obviously. There's a lot to do in this tutorial, but one thing I'm noticing already is that these bulbs are really high density as far as geometry, and we could really, really lower that if we come into our bulb and come into the bulb itself. Now we could let me just shut off the cloner. This will make this a little easier. We can come into the bulb itself and see that there's a lot of rounding going on, and I don't think we'll ever get that close to the bulb. So we can actually come into our object and say rotation segments, maybe more like 20. That should be better. And especially the caps. If we come out to the caps, we can go to this cylinder cap here and say, well, we don't need the size is fine, but the rotation segments, again, we could drop this down to 20. And what we could really drop are these end corner segments here. In the caps itself, it's saying 5 segments per cap. We could do more like 3 maybe. And that'll really reduce the polygons. And especially when we're working with dynamics and so many clones, you really want to optimize this geometry as much as you can before moving on. So we could do the same thing with the capsules. In fact, we can grab all the capsules at once. Before I do that, let me grab the other cylinder and type this in. It's 3 segments and 20 rotation segments just to knock the other side down. But now we can actually grab all the capsules, and I did that by holding Command and selecting each capsule. And now, same thing, we can go to rotation segments. We could probably even drop this to 15. You see how small they are. We don't need any height segments. So we could just set that to 0. And then the cap segments we could drop to, I don't know, 4. But you can see how much less geometry now is in these bulbs. And we could always crank it back up. But starting with a low number for now really helps us animate quicker, get our clones moving around faster. You can see our viewport is already moving fast. And quickly, too, one of the points that somebody told me about geometry and how to notice it is when you start to see your geometry become all white like this at the scale that you're animating. That's a good clue to know that your geometry is too dense. So in other words, once we zoom in here, we could see the individual lines of our bulb. So if we were rendering at this scale, that would be about okay. But as soon as you get out far enough, you're going to see basically the bulbs turn into a white blob. And when this happens, it's a good clue that you could probably reduce some of your polygons. Anyway, let's actually get into animating this thing, Nick, and stop jibber jabbing. So we have our moving clones here, and we're going to randomize them by selecting our cloner, going up to MoGraph, Effector, Random, and you can see by default it's moving its position. Now that's okay. We can actually come into our position parameters here and adjust them. And the first one we want to adjust is probably the Y parameter, because the Y parameter is really moving these up and down really far, and we really don't want that. We kind of want, maybe 5 centimeters, maybe 10, I don't know, something just a little bit. Because what we're going to do is we're going to kind of have these over the ground, and then we're going to drop them to kind of have them have their starting point. And we'll get to that. But let's go ahead and get some more random settings going. Maybe rotation is a little bit random. And we can, there we go, rotate our heading. Not so much our pitch, because that's gonna be determined by how they fall on top of each other. And you can see rotating the banking isn't doing anything because they're just round bulbs, and you don't see much. So there is our bulbs. Now there's a lot more steps, but let's get the core of this going, and then we're going to backtrack and replicate some other parts of this. So we have our bulbs laying on the ground, and now we need to get our attractor going to kind of get them to stick to the attractor. So let's go into simulation, particle attractor. And this is how I got them all to kind of jump up and move and drag, because not only are they kind of pointing toward the sky, but they're also being pulled. You can see them actually move. If you watch like one of these bulbs, it's actually being dragged that direction. So some people mentioned to maybe use a pointer kind of situation, or like a target effector where they all kind of point in one way. And that would only get you so far, because they're not only pointing in a direction, but they're also being pulled. So this let's go find it again, Nick. Let's go simulation, particle. This attractor system actually does both. So if we pull the attractor and we kind of pull it up into the sky, we can now play the animation, and of course nothing happens because we still have a lot to set up, Nick. So let's go into our full bulb hierarchy and start to set up our motion dynamics tags. So in our bulb, we're going to add a dynamics tag, which is right here. Now I have these out in my layout, and if you, I'll try to remember to put a link in the tutorial for you guys to get this layout if you want. But all of these are actually under simulation dynamics. Boom, right there. These should be identical. And a quick note, I am using version 12. There are a few things that I'm going to use in this tutorial that are 12 specific, but I'm trying to think. Most of it should be available in 11.5 and wherever you have motion dynamics or MoDynamics. So let's move forward, Nick. Let's go. I love talking to myself, by the way. Let's create a rigid body tag for our main bulb, and then let's make sure that all of these things are like kind of attached to it. So I'm just going to put the caps under the bulb, hoping that when the bulb moves, that all the caps come along with it. So let's go. I think that worked. So our floor obviously needs a rigid body tag, as well as the ground. So I'm sorry, the ground and the wall. So let's select both, add a dynamics body tag, and this time I'm going to add one that's a static body tag. You can see the blue. The blue one here actually allows the floor not to fall when gravity takes hold. So hopefully our clones fall, very good, and our floor stops them from hitting the dang ground. Very good. So now we have this attractor. And if we start to turn up the strength of the attractor, let's see, let's just start putting some crazy numbers in here, like 50. No, I'm going to move this down. Let's try 100. Okay, now we're getting some more movement. Let's get 1,000. Oh boy, look at that. So you can see our bulbs are now attracted to this point in space, right? And I can move the attractor up and try to get them to kind of start to hover. And if I get a high enough number, you're going to see them kind of start to float up there. But we have a problem, right? This isn't what we're trying to recreate. And this could be cool, but this isn't really doing what we need it to do. So I started thinking, how can we make these bulbs keep their back end on the ground, but keep the front end, the tip, pointed in the air when the attractor comes on. And the kind of technique I came up with was trying to kind of do it like real life does it. And whenever I get stuck in these things and figure out what button and what icon to push, sometimes it's nice to step back and realize that all of these dynamic systems are trying to replicate real life. And if this was going on in real life, what would you do? So in this case, what I'm going to do is add a weight to the bottom of the bulb, hoping that the weight will keep the butt end of the bulb on the ground, and then the front end of the bulb will be loose and light for it to kind of trigger up toward the sky, right? So if we look at this animation, imagine a weight actually in the bulb down here, trying to keep it on the ground. But the other end of the bulb is so light and flimsy that it is kind of being pulled up by the attractor, right? Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So let's go ahead and add that weight. So I'm going to turn off our cloner for a moment, come into our main bulb, and I'm going to grab a cylinder. I'm actually just going to replicate our bulb that we have. I'm going to copy and paste. I'm going to delete the caps out of it. I'm going to pull this in and call this weight. And the weight, I'm going to actually, because I copied and pasted, it already has this tag on it, but you want to make sure you have a dynamics tag on. That's really important because this is all part of the dynamics calculation. I'm also going to zoom in here, and I'm going to shrink down. If we go to the bulb height, I'm going to shrink down the bulb height like that, and it's basically just a little weight. And I'm going to shrink down the radius as well, so it's kind of hidden away from everything. It's literally inside the bulb here. And just to be sure I'm on the right side of things, I'm gonna make it a little bit larger. In fact, I'm gonna make it a lot larger. I'm gonna make it like 10 centimeters in my case. I'm gonna turn on the cloner and make sure that it's the right way. And I'm not. I'm actually on the wrong side. You can see what I really want is the weight to be in the back, away from the attractor, and then the tips to be light to kind of point toward the sky. So I have to turn off the cloner again, move the weight up to the other end just to make sure we're on the right side of things, and then shrink that radius back down. Not 40, 4, Nick. Should do it. 4 still too big. Let's go to 3 and just put that weight right there in the back. Now, let's turn on our cloner. Let's zoom back here. Let's hit play and see what happens. Well, now we have another problem is our weights are not attached to our cylinders. Now, this is where I think this is a 12 only solution, but there may be another way around it in 11.5. I'm not sure, but this may be a 12 only solution. So let's go ahead and solve it, which is we need to connect the weight to the bulb, and that's what these connectors are for. You can find yours up in simulation. Mine's right here. It's a connector. I'm going to pull it into our hierarchy of our full bulb, and I'm going to connect our weight to our bulb. And so you can see there's, in the connector itself, there's object A and object B. And I'm going to say, I want to connect the weight, boom, to the bulb, bam, and that's it. We're all done. The last thing you have to do is, instead of using a hinge, we just want to use a fixed connector. We want these to be perfectly fixed so it doesn't move around. So now when we hit play, we're starting to get a little bit better. So you can see the front ends are coming up before the back ends. The problem is this weight really doesn't weigh too much. It's a small little object, and Cinema by default is going to kind of pretend that all of these objects are made by the same kind of materials, and they all kind of weigh a similar amount based on how large they are. Well, we need to kind of override that and say, no, this weight is heavy, And so we need to come into its dynamics tag and go into our mass. And instead of world density, we need custom density. And we just crank this density up. Let's be silly for now and just crank it up to 100 and see what happens. So now what hopefully should happen is the tips should come up first. Let's even go higher and go to 1,000. There we go. So you can see they're kind of flying up. Another thing we could do is on our attractor, there's respect dynamics mass. And this is really going to help us solve this problem, because this is going to really respect the weight and the mass of all of our objects and treat them the way that they should. So now you can see our strength is too high. We hit play and these things start flying all around. So now we can maybe turn this down to 1,000, even 500. And now we're starting to get, check that out. We're starting to get exactly what we want. That's great. So we could actually move maybe our attractor up a little bit. And it's, you know what? It's looking pretty good until they hit the attractor and they go nuts. So maybe it's a matter of turning down our strength still a little bit more. And what you want is enough strength to kind of have them get real excited, point up toward the attractor, but not enough to make them fly all around. And now the real secret is going to be the attractor will be animated. So hopefully they never get to this point where they start to fly up into the sky, right? And we could even turn our weight up even more, and maybe something like 2,000, right? So that they just almost never even make it up to that attractor point. It's just, there we go. That may be a good start. That may be a good start. So let's start there. One thing I'm going to do is turn off our cloner and make sure that our weight, make sure that the back end of this weight is as far back as it can be, because I really want those the front ends of those bulbs to fly up. So we can move this back, and we could probably even shrink it a little bit. Make sure it's way back there in the cap, because that's going to determine kind of how quickly these things fly up into the air. So I'm liking this for now. Let's stick with this, and let's stop moving the camera around so much and start to set up a normal camera. So let's move in kind of where the camera might be and go ahead and set up a camera. Boom. Which means now we can look through the camera, or we can kind of zoom around and play around with all this other stuff. So other things we can do. Let's get into this. One thing that you may remember when we talked about this is that there's kind of two separate particle systems going on. There's one going on here, and you can see there's still dead ones laying on the ground. And then the opposite one, this one, is lighting up the other ones that were dead in the first round and taking them off. So there's actually two separate particle systems to worry about. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky with naming things and just keeping things organized. But we need to set up two separate systems. And now that we like our cloner, we can start to do that. And maybe, you know what, maybe right before we do that, let's go ahead and texture these so that when we duplicate our cloning system, that we already have our textures on and everything else. So let's go ahead and go into new material. And the first material we will build is the bulb. So the bulb, by default, when it's off, kind of has a gradient from dark to light gray to dark gray. See how that's a little bit darker on the corners there? And that could be solved with some lighting tricks and everything, but it's just probably way better to just put it right into the gradient itself. So in our color, we're going to say gradient. We're going to say, go into our gradient and check a V gradient. And then what we could do is kind of set up a system like this, where it's kind of light in the middle and heavy dark on the corners. We can lighten up those black areas so they're not purely black. But that feels pretty good. And we could add this directly to the bulb, and we hit play. And now we could render, I should say. And now you can see, boom, we have our bulb texture. Of course, we're going to have to add some reflection in here and some Fresnel shading just to get our reflections down. We may, we may tweak this as it goes, but that's a good bulb shader. And there's going to be more to the bulb because we also have to make the lighting, the bulb texture when it lights up. So this is the bulb texture when it's off. It's going to be kind of, light gray. And frankly, when it's lit up, really the only difference is that it's lit up. And what I mean by that is we can go in here to our gradient for a color, copy the channel, go into luminance, turn on luminance, paste channel, and now if we hit render, that's our texture when it's lit up. Same thing, it's kind of dark on the corners and light in the middle, and I think maybe the only difference is that our gradient on the edges is a lot brighter. It's not going to fall off that dark. So maybe like that. But let's shut that off for now. Give you a little hint. We're going to animate this down the road using the attractor and using a bunch of other stuff. So there's our thing. Boom, boom, boom. Oh man, I need a little drink of water, folks. This is gonna be a long one. I feel it. Maybe a little two-parter. But I think it'll be real fun. All right, that's delicious. So we have our cloner, we have our texture. Let's go into our chrome texture, new material. And our chrome texture is really simple. We'll turn off color, we'll go into reflection, and we'll go to Fresnel shading in our texture, and we're going to turn the Fresnel way down and keep our brightness of our texture or of our reflection way up. And it's basically almost 100% reflective everywhere. It's kind of this chrome look. And we're going to add that to everything else. Except for our weight, obviously doesn't need a texture. That's just inside hanging out. We could add it to our capsules. We could add it to our posts. We could add it to our cylinders. And now we have chrome on the edges, light in the middle, and we are ready to go. So that's our one cloner system. So let's go ahead and name this Cloner 1, right? And now we can actually duplicate this whole thing, copy, paste, rename it. I'm going to go in here and double click and say Cloner 2. And now we have two systems, which is going to be helpful because we have to animate two separate systems as well. So the only thing is they're being randomized by the same random effector. And this is an issue because we want them to be different. We want them to kind of behave slightly differently so they fall on top of each other differently. So we need to go into Cloner 2 and go into effectors and see there's random. We also need a random too. So let's just duplicate the random, copy, paste, come into random here, call this random 2. And in Cloner 2, we're going to replace random with random 2. And you say, oh crap, I replaced it with a new random, but it's identical still. What's going on? Well, if you go into the random effector itself, there's a seed number. And this seed number makes it so that random isn't always perfectly random. It's controllably random. So if you always use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're always going to get the same type of randomness. And this is really helpful when it comes to computer animation. You don't want things totally random every time you hit the play button. You want controlled randomness. So all you have to do is come into random 2 and change the seed number. And you can see now we have a slightly different version of randomness that plays out through those bulbs. So Cloner 2, we're just going to raise this up in the air a little bit. And we're also going to play a little bit more around with the random settings. Maybe make it more random. Let's move these puppies around. I'm moving the positions just so it doesn't look like a big circle as much as it did. I'm also going to use the camera and move it way up and realize I think we can get away with more clones. I'm going to select both clones. I'm going to go into our object and say, let's crank this up. Also, I think we can go a little bit wider here. Yeah, this is looking good. So let's hit play and see what happens. I'm going to turn the attractor off for now because all we're concerned about is them falling into place to start this animation. Sweetness. Let's look back in our camera and see how it looks. There's an obvious hole here in the middle that we need to fix, right? So let's go back up to our upper camera. There we go. Let's go back up to our upper camera, play with the random settings, and come into parameter. See if we can play around a little bit more with our randomness to kind of fill in that gap a little bit. And maybe we have to shrink our size back down. Oh, see, there we go. Now we're talking. That seems a little bit more random, right? Let's look back through our camera. That looks maybe a little center heavy. We could maybe spread it out a little bit. There we go. Let's hit play. Boom. All right. That's feeling pretty good. What else can we do here? What else can we do? Let's get our camera lower, maybe zoomed out. All right. That's feeling pretty good for now. All this stuff will change more and more and more as we tweak this animation. So let's get the basics going, and then we'll move forward. So the first thing we need to do is figure out a starting point. And thank you to Mike the monkey, who helped me through this little problem I had, which I totally forgot version 12 had now, which is in the bulb settings, or I'm sorry, in the Dynamics body tag settings, there's now a set initial state button. And I totally forgot that was there. I think this is new to 12. And I just totally forgot that you could set initial states now with your Dynamics. So what I did was come in the cloner, select our bulb and our bulb down here, and our weight. Actually, we have to set all of these things. Select all of your dynamic body tags and just let them fall, right? And if you need more time for them to fall, just kind of move the playhead back. Don't go back to 0 because they'll reset. But this is kind of the starting point. And I think we're okay right here. Let's go ahead and set initial state. Now that we have all of our Dynamics tags selected, we set initial state. Now we can go to 0, and they don't have to fall on the ground before we can start to kind of see them. And this is going to be helpful because we want them to animate right away. We don't want them to have to fall onto the ground, right? So this saved a lot of time, so thanks to Mike for reminding me that that is there. So the next thing we need to do is, man, there's so much to do. What do we do next, Nick? What makes the most sense? Let's get our attractor set up to kind of point toward the sky. Make sure it's at a good number, and then what we have to do is tie a different attractor to each set of particles. So let's go ahead and turn on attractor now, and you'll see that right away it's actually affecting all of them. Even if I turn the strength down, because it seems a little kind of high right now, you can see them kind of fly up into the air, and they're getting a little nuts, right? But all of them are being affected. What we want, like we saw in the original animation, is we want some of the bulbs to react first, and then the other set of bulbs to react second. See what's going on there? That's what we need to do. And the way we do that is we tie attractors to each set of the cloners. So now we have attractor. Let's go ahead and just rename this attractor 1 and copy and paste and call this attractor 2. And you can see now it's actually just 2 attractors doubling up on each other and making these bulbs go crazy. Now here's how we do this and set this up so each different set of cloning systems sees different attractors. And I actually learned this on Tim Clapham's excellent blog, Hello Lux. And he has a post where he shows you how to set up 2 separate gravity systems. And that's another thing I have to remember to link down in here. And that helped me out a lot in trying to figure out how to get these attractors to look at these 2 separate cloning systems and react to these cloning systems separately. So thanks to Tim for that. And let me show you what he shows you how to do, which is you go into, let's stop this. This is distracting. You go into the Dynamics tags of your cloning systems, and you go to Force. And in your Force menu, there's this little selection right here that says Force Mode, Exclude. And what you want to do is exclude the attractor that you don't want to react with this set of cloning. So in this case, in the cloner 2, we only want attractor 2 to affect cloner 2, which means we want to ignore attractor 1. And then the opposite thing is true down here. We want to select these tags, and we want to exclude cloner 2 because we're in, or I'm sorry, we want to exclude attractor 2 because we're in cloner 1. So let's go up, exclude attractor 2. And now if we only turn on attractor 1, hopefully half of these bulbs will be affected by attractor 1. And then if I turn off attractor 1, attractor 2, if I turn up that, will affect those bulbs. And this is what we want. Now you can see we still have a lot of work with this, the bulbs and getting all that stuff together, but the keys are here. the key parts of the animation are set up. Now we just have to animate it, which is we need to animate attractor 1 to kind of turn on and off, and we need to animate attractor 2 to turn on and off. And at the same time, we need to animate the lights going on and off. See what's going on there. So you can see the lights are flickering, popping up, and then the same thing with the other sets of lights. When they flicker, they fly up. And whenever you see something like that where there are matching animations, like whenever something is going in a direction, it's getting louder or brighter or something like that, you always want to start to maybe think about using Xpresso to tie things together. And this will be really, really helpful because then we only have to animate one thing at a time instead of two. Let me take another drink of water here. All right. Well, let's set up the some Xpresso. You know what? Let's just go ahead and do it, Nick. There's so much to do now, but let's get up some of the basic Xpresso going. I think the last thing we'll do before actually the Xpresso is make sure that these physics are working a little bit better. You can see it's still a little wiggly, a little waggly. And I think the way we're going to fix that is open up our cloners and realize now that if we close up our caps, whatever we do to one set of cloners, we have to do to the other, because these bulbs are supposed to be identical. Maybe this is something we should have tweaked before we had two particle systems, but you just have to make sure that whatever you do to one weight, you do to the other. Whatever you do to one bulb, you do to the other. So let's go ahead and select our bulbs and select both of them by hitting Command and clicking them both. And I'm going to go to Mass. And I'm going to play with the custom density with the mass as well. The mass for the bulbs are going to be real low, like 0.5, like real flimsy. But the rotational mass, I think I'm going to turn it up and see if that doesn't help get rid of some of this wiggly, wobbly stuff. I'm also going to go up to the attractor and maybe even turn it down a little bit. No, well, that's just not doing it. Let's turn it back up. I think that might work okay. Let's zoom back and see if we can maybe pull this attractor up higher. And what we're trying to get rid of is them trying to like fly around. Oh, see, now we're getting somewhere. See how now they're being kind of pulled toward it, but they're not all hovering below it like a UFO. And this tweaking process really, when I went in and tried this out for the first time, really took a long time. And I would expect you guys to really play around with the strength parameter, the weights of the bulbs, the rotational. Let's go back and explain the rotational mass. So what the rotational mass says is these things just don't rotate around so quickly. They are actually some weight to the rotation as well, which means they don't just flimsy all around. So if we set this to 10, you can see it's more like grass, right? It's more like it could bend and wiggle. It's so fast you could barely, keep up. But if you turn this up, let's say to 300, you can see now it's starting to slow down. It's not as fast. And if we really crank it up to, let's say, 1,000, you can see now the rotation is nice and slow. So we kind of, you want to play with this number. You want to play with the density of the mass of the bulb, which depends on how quickly it snaps up. If we make the bulb heavier, it's not going to be willing to kind of come off the ground as quickly. We could turn that down. You can see now it's a lot slower. So all these numbers come into play. I'm going to turn it back down. All these numbers come into play when it comes to getting that animation just right. And we're going to tweak these as much as we can. So this seems a lot better to me. This kind of flippy bulb thing. Maybe the bulbs are a little bit heavier, maybe 0.4. That's not bad. And maybe the attractor's set a little bit higher, 350. So they don't wobble as much, so they just kind of aim toward. Yeah, that's looking a little better. We're also going to get slightly different animation as we start to animate our attractor. So we could turn off this attractor, turn on the other one, turn off that one, turn on this one, right? And this is roughly what we're going to get. The other thing is, as we're playing with it before we get to the Xpresso, is I think the whole system's just a little bit too large. So if we look up here, we have our bulb, we have our camera, And it's just a lot of space. I don't really even think we need this much space. We can kind of zoom the camera in a little bit, take our cloners, come into our objects, and really maybe shrink this down and clump them together a little bit more. I mean, you still want it to feel random, but I feel like this attractor really isn't hitting these other ones. So let's go ahead and back. This may be a little bit better. Let's hit play. And now if we turn on our attractor, now we may have to reset up our initial state because we moved them, but now we're actually, I think, getting a little bit better. Let's move our camera, rotate around a bit, get low, nice and low on the ground. There we go. So let's go ahead and, yeah. This is kind of cool. Much better. Okay, cool. I'm feeling this. They're still a little springy, but again, we can always fix this stuff as we go. Let's go ahead and set up our basic animation and get our Espresso together, because not only do we want these, let's explain first what the Espresso will do. The Espresso will make the attractor turn on, and remember this luminance texture we made for the bulb. And if we have that luminance texture come on, that we also want that to come on whenever the attractor is attracting it. And so I'll show you how to set that Espresso. The first thing we actually need to do, though, is we need two separate bulb textures, one for each cloning system. So we need to come into our material here and say bulb 1. We're going to copy and paste that, not up there, in here. We're going to double click there, and in here say bulb 2. So now we have two separate bulbs. We're going to turn on the luminance for each. And that's exactly what we want. The way we're going to control this is right here. This brightness slider is going to be the way that we animate the brightness of our bulbs. So what we have to do is we have to set our mix mode to multiply. So if we turn it down, we get no luminance channel. And as we turn it up, the luminance channel turns on. So we got to do the same for the other one. Let's go ahead and set this to multiply. Down, off, all the way up, on, right? So now if we do this and we set our bulb 2 to be our cloner 2 bulb, which is up here, you can see cloner 2, bulb, replace. Now half the bulbs are on and half the bulbs are off. There's really not too big a difference right now because we have our default light on. But if we were just to add one more light into the scene and kind of just pull it up overhead, there's our lights. Boom. You can see now the ones that are off are kind of have this more black feel to them, and then the ones that are on are lit up right there. And that's what we want. We want separate control over each cloner. So now we have to set up our basic Espresso. So let's just make a new null. Let's go up and call this Espresso Animator. And this is really just a null that's going to have all the Espresso controls on it to animate everything else. So we can come up to our user data, say add user data, and on our actual null here, and we're going to add some user data. The user data are basically sliders that are going to allow us to animate stuff down the road. And in this case, we want a float data type, which is just kind of just numbers. We want a float slider, which means that we can actually animate it like this. And the units, we're going to use, let's just use real for now. So you can see you could pick percentage, degrees, all this stuff. So float slider, real, and this first one's going to be called cloner system 1. That's as good as anything because it's doing multiple things at once. So let's just call that cloner system 1 animator. That sounds good. And then we can actually right click on this. We can go control click, say copy, and then paste. And we can just come in here and say same as the first, but control cloner system 2 animator. And when we click OK, on the Espresso Animator null, there's going to be user data for both of these things. You can see all the way up to 1,000. Boom, boom. And all the way up to 1,000 may be too much. Let's go ahead back into our manage user data. And I think we could select both and say maximum, just 100. So we have a slider now that is 0 to 100. that we're going to use to control not only our attractor amount, but also our lighting of the bulbs. The lighting of the bulbs. So let's set that up. So if we go into your Espresso editor, which here in my setup, which again I'll have to remember to put a link to, in the Espresso editor, this is where we're going to do all of our kind of work. If you don't have the Espresso editor, you can go to Window, and it's in here somewhere probably. It better be. Well, dang it, where would it be? Am I missing it? Yeah, it's probably in there somewhere. We'll figure that out. But for now, no, you could get it through my workflow, and maybe I'm missing something, but the Espresso editor should be maybe on one of these things up top here. Window. Yeah, well, we'll figure that out. But for now, let's go ahead and in the Espresso editor. Well, I don't want you guys to just sit here and not follow along if you don't know where your Espresso editor is. Additional scene managers. So there's a console. That's fun. We can also look for, we could just go head on into the documentation. It's very helpful here. Espresso editor. Espresso editor. Menu. Espresso context menu. Espresso editor. Menu. This is probably so simple, and I know you guys are probably yelling at me like, it's in this menu. But we'll get an official answer for you. Here's what I think. I think if we add a tag, so let's move ahead and see if this works. If we add a tag, go to Espresso Animator, and we go to tags, and we go to Cinema 4D tags, and we come all the way down here to Espresso, and we add the Espresso tag, and if you double click on that dude, I'm going to bet that this window pops up. I'm going to bet on it. You double click on that, and wherever it pops up, you can pull it back into your interface just by dragging on this little kind of handle right there. You can move it around, right? And again, I have mine over here, and in fact, I just pull it back over there. Now it's in where I want it. I want it right there. Cool. So that should work. Make the tag, double click on it, and welcome to Espresso. Holy crap, so sorry that took a minute, but let's just go ahead. Let's pretend that didn't happen. In our Espresso Animator, the first thing we need is our own Espresso Animator null. And I'm not going to pretend like this is an intro to Espresso because there's so much to go, and I don't want to go step by step on everything and explain exactly what it is. Maybe I'll do that in a later tutorial. Or if you check out Robert Lega, his site, it's another link I gotta put into the show notes here. We could put a little text edit here. We could say, "Holy crap, you need to Robert's site." And you have to put up the interface, and you have to give a shout out to Tim Clapham, and what the heck, thanks to Mike as well. Oh man, this is so behind the scenes, guys. I'm so sorry, but if I don't do it now, it probably won't get done. All right, let's go ahead and do this. We got Espresso Animator, and in the Espresso Animator, if you command click on this red side, you're going to get all this crap, right? And what you're concerned with is user data. You want Cloner System 1 Animator, click it again, user data Cloner System 2 Animator, right? And right there, you're gonna rock up on this thing. And so the next thing we need to do is set up our attractors. So we pull in attractor 1, attractor 2, and now those are in the system. The last things we need in the system are bulb 1 and bulb 2. Okay. So here's the idea. I'm gonna get these kind of situated. When we turn up our Cloner System 1 Animator, we want attractor 1 to turn up as well and bulb 1 to turn up. Okay. Now the basic way to do this is to just drag this into our attractor 1, our bulb 1, our attractor 2, and our bulb 2. And what we have to do is add what parameter in these things do you want to drive with this. So again, we're going to command click on the blue end, which is the input, and figure out what we want. So for the attractor, what we want is object properties strength, right? Attractor 2, same thing, object properties strength. And you can see it's right up in here. Attractor 1, object strength. That's what we're driving. That's what this little dot is for. Bulb, what we want for bulb is luminance, luminance brightness. Same thing on bulb 2, luminance, luminance brightness. And in the bulb, it's right here, luminance, brightness. Boom, right there. This is what we're controlling. So what we can do is go just directly in. We could take a click from this dot to this dot, from this dot to this dot, from this dot to this dot, from this dot to this dot. Now, what's cool is if we turn on our attractor 1, we can now hit play, and our strength will be 0. You can see they're moving around a little bit, but that's because they're all intersecting a little bit. We'll fix that. But if we turn up our Cloner 1 animator, our strength actually goes up for our attractor. And if we do a render, the ones that are swinging around are actually on, right? And the ones that are laying on the ground, the other particle system, are off, right? Now there's a few things wrong right now. The things wrong are because of the way that the espresso is set up, everything has to be the same amount, and this isn't the way we want it. We actually want the strength, remember, to go as high as, 300, right? Because we were putting numbers in there like 2 or 300. We also want the bulb, because of the way that this is a real number and it's being pushed into a percentage, which is not a real number. Percentage, in percentage language, 100% is 1, right? So it's actually driving luminance into 10, let's see, what is that? 10,000%. And 10,000% brightness isn't giving us our nice gradients. It's just this white glowing stick. So the way we fix this is in our espresso, we need range mappers. And if we just right click into our espresso editor, we can come into espresso, calculate range mapper. And now we want a range mapper between each of these things. And we could just move these over, and we have a range mapper here that, let's set up this first one first. This first one is for attractor. And now the range mapper, we come in, we close this. Here are all the settings, and you have to realize that you need to just change some stuff. Data type, we want real. Input range, right? The input range is 0 to 100, right? That's our input range. We can also just have this to user defined. I guess it worked the same way. But 0 to 100, just to keep it making sense. And then the output range for our attractor is just user defined as well. And the reason we want to do that is because we want to specify what our output upper is. So you can see input lower is 0. Input upper is 100, and that's our slider, 0 to 100. And then what the range mapper does is say, instead of 0 to 100, I want you to map this to 0 to 350, because that's around the right number we had for our attractor. So there we go. So now we have to kind of get this thing through this little box and into our strength, bang. And now if we go to our attractor, and we sometimes you just have to move this slider, but if we go back to the attractor and come out, maybe hit play, then we should be on 350. See what's going on? Now there's a little bit of refresh issue with Espresso. You just sometimes hit play or move around, but it will update. See, it says 350 now. Our Espresso animator is up to 100. And if we turn this down, and then we go into our attractor, you can see it actually moved the strength of our attractor down, and our bulb is at a different number as well. Now, it's still too high. It's at 3,400, but you can see it correlates with our Espresso up here, 34, 3,400. So let's fix our Espresso for our bulb, which, holy crap, I'm realizing this could be a whole tutorial in itself. It is just an Espresso. Maybe I should have broken this apart, but for now, let's get through this, and we'll definitely dive more into Espresso and make this more clear down the road. So let's make another range mapper. Right? So one thing we can do is just go ahead and delete these. We could just grab this and move them like that to just flick them, unplug them basically. This range mapper is identical to the one we need for this attractor. So what I could do is hold down Command and drag, and it'll make another copy. And then I could just boom in, right there, out, 350, 350, and it'll do the same thing with 2 different parameters. Now let's build the bulb range mapper. Let's right click, new node, Espresso, calculate, range mapper. And in this case, we have the same thing, input range 0 to 100. And now the output range is percentage. That's what we want. We want 0 to 100 to be turned into 0 to 100% for our brightness. Plug it in, make a copy, plug it in. Dude, now we got it. Now when this is set up to 100, the range, the lighting is now correct. We have our gray edges. If we turn on our bulb, you can see our luminance is turned up to 100, or it should be on one of these. There we go. Boom. And so that's it. That's the key part. Now all we have to do is animate these things in turn to go, flicker on and off. We have all this other stuff to pay attention to, like they flicker on and off, and then they zoom up, and then they turn off, right? We have to animate all this stuff. And as well, we have to texture this. We have to tweak it a lot. We have a whole lot to do. But I think that we'll kind of leave it at here for right now. I think this is a good place to stop. It's been a long one. I feel my hair's grown since the beginning of this tutorial. It's gonna be a long one. I'll get part 2 out to you real soon, and we'll finish this puppy up where we'll tweak I think the Espresso's written, but I think we'll have to tweak the parameters inside of it, like the strength of the attractor. Of course, we have all the lighting to do in the scene. We have all the textures on the floor and the wall to set up. We have our render settings. We have lighting, we have rendering, we have even maybe we even might have time to hop into After Effects and do a little bit of depth of field work on the scene and finish it up. But this is gonna be a big one, folks. So stay tuned. I'll get you part 2 real soon. Thanks for watching part 1. If you have any questions or comments, drop them in the comments below of this tutorial on Grayscale Gorilla. And the comments lately have been such a great place to get more information. If you're stuck, if something's not working, hop into the comments and ask a question. People have been really, really good on helping. I hang out there as well. So hope to see you there. I'll see you in part 2 as well. So thanks again for watching this one. I'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.